Right, here we are, the Gondolas of Venice.
They're gone.
They're gone. Oh, there we are. A bit, yes, the famous Gondolas of Venice. Why they were that long, I have no idea, but Nick, who is the expert, will tell us all about them, how they started, where they started, why they started, and when they've ended up. So please introduce Nick Birch.
Yes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the tour. And welcome to everyone online who's watching too. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. No, great, that sounds all right. Just better change my glasses now so I can read what we're doing. So the Venetian gondola is the most instantly recognisable boat in the world. Its form has been represented countless times in paintings, prose, in photographs and in popular culture. It's unique and mysterious, but where did it come from and how did it evolve into what we see today? It is without doubt the most extraordinary archetype of art, artistry and naval architecture. So in tonight's talk, I'm going to start with Marie Corelli's gondola, then look at the modern gondola, its history and development, how they're built, Venetian rowing, and finally the future. And we've got lots and lots of pictures to go through, so I hope you'll enjoy them. So it all started when I saw this photo in 1993 of Marie Corelli's gondola on the Avon. I wanted to know, where did it come from and what happened to it? They said that she had just obtained it from Venice, but I discovered this was one of Marie Corelli's economies with the truth. It was in fact ordered by Herman Kant of London Exhibitions at Earl's Court for an Italian fair in 1904. And here is the quote from Giuseppe Casal and Sons, the most famous gondola builders of time in Venice. And they quoted to supply a luxury gondola for 1,250 lira. It's about £30,000 today. A luxury gondola was one with additional carvings and more expensive fittings. And this is a photo of the time of the Casal family boatyard in Venice with a variety of different boats being worked on, including a gondola here. Marie Corelli bought the gondola when it was auctioned after the fair, and it arrived in Stratford in May of the same year. She used it frequently for outings on the Avon and genuinely adored it. It was looked after by Davis's boat hire station at the ferry and kept in the Vicar's Arches, the boathouse for the old Flowers Villa at Avonbank. Here she is attending the boat club regatta to give the prizes. Her original gondolier was a Venetian who came with the boat, but he pulled a knife on someone in the Dirty Duck, drinking with a member of the boat club. Corelli was incensed and he was sent packing, and he was replaced by her gardener, Ernest Chandler. Sadly, Ernest was killed in the First World War, and she never used the boat again. It was laid up until Marie Corelli's death in 1924, 101 years ago today, and remained in store until the contents of the house were sold in 1943 after Bertha Viver's death. The gondola was bought at auction by a Mr. Gray and then moved to his factory in London after the war. It was tracked down in the late 1950s by Mervyn Griffiths, here standing on the back, attempting to row in this photo on the Thames with a scooter in it for a publicity advert. Bravo him. He then took it to Cambridge for the May Ball and brought it back to Stratford with the hope of putting it on the river. Here it is being repaired by a local boat builder, George Onions. There's the Clopton Bridge in the top, the approach to it, so we're on the old Cup Market. Note it also had a small cabin or felze, which has sadly disappeared. It looks like he could not find anywhere from which to operate it on the Avon, so he took it to Ragley Hall as he was friends with Lord Hertford and rode it on the lake for the summer of 1960. The next year he was called up for national service and the gondola sunk on the lake, but was bought and salvaged by Turks of Kingston-on-Thames to join their collection of boats for use as film props. I tracked it down to them in 1993 and asked to purchase it, but they wanted a new boat plus a premium in exchange. However, in 2010, they decided to sell their collection of boats at auction, and here it is in Turk's store at Chatham Dockyard, where I saw it, in a pale grey undercoat. My colleagues in Venice authenticated the boat, finding the original order which we saw in the boat builder's archives, including drawings for the design of the carvings you can see on the foredeck. And here she is, fully restored, back on the River Avon outside the boathouse. Note the brass seahorses on the side of the armrests and the ropes with the sort of fluffy balls and the velvet cushions, the carved boards called fodre inside the boat and the painted floorboards, all part of the equipment for a Venetian gondola. Corelli's gondola is actually unique, even in Venice. It was built to be 2/3 the length of a standard Venetian gondola. We think for ease of shipping to the UK. And here it is in front of a full-size gondola behind it for comparison. Corelli's is 24 feet long. The full-size one is 36 feet long. So now let's look at gondolas in Venice. You say this is not a gondola. Of course, but it's the most common type of traditional boat in the city, the sandalo. But the purpose is to show you that gondolas are only one of many different types of boats in the city, including barchette, battelli, burchielli, burci, bisone, bragossi, cavline, toppi, pugurini, peate, sambirotte, mascarette, and the chopot. And they all had different forms and different uses. So what are the essential characteristics of the gondola? It's most aptly described by Horatio Brown in his book, Life on the Lagoons, published in 1884. He said, "It is the most charming carriage in the world, and so thoroughly Venetian that Venice would hardly be Venice without it. There is a sentiment and flavour of antiquity about the gondola, which it owes to its leisurely natural development. It is in no sense an invention. It is a growth directed by the needs of its native place, bearing on its structure of today the impress of Venetian life and history. Through centuries of experience, the boat has been fashioned and modified until at length it has achieved the union of beauty, ease, and usefulness. The long black skiff with its graceful lines, its swan-like prow sweeping up from the water, and its gliding movement, it is a dear and lovely feature, the most familiar in the city of the sea. So perfect is its structure that the poised oarsman behind, by a delicate turn of his wrist, may guide the boat whither he will. Nothing indicates movement but the ripple and lap of water under the bows, the slow swaying of the steel ferro from side to side, and the slower gliding by of the palace fronts. We've all seen them on the canals of Venice, but let us examine the boat in more detail. The shape is unique in naval architecture. It has a double-ended hull with rounded topsides, which we call flam. You can see, if you look at the sides of the boat, so in the picture. It has a flat bottom without a keel, with rocker or fore and aft curvature, with the ends raised out of the water. And it's long and slender, at 36 foot overall and only 4 foot 6 inches wide. If you look closely, you will see that the hull is curiously asymmetrical, with a pronounced bend or curvature to the right. But why so long? And why is it asymmetric? Then there's the famous stem fitting, or ferro, as it's called, at the front, with 6 teeth. Ferro literally means iron, as though it was made of forged iron back in the past. But for the latter part of the 20th century, they were made of aluminium to be lighter and easier to clean. And modern ones are cut out of stainless steel. They will tell you in Venice, if you ask them, there are 6 teeth for the 6 sestiarial zones of the city, but it's fanciful nonsense. But why is it like that, and what is it for? They appear to have a variety of fancy internal decorations and furnishings, but gondolas are always black. Again, why black? Finally, we have the gondolier standing on the back with 1 oar. But why would you want to row a 36-foot long boat standing on the back anyway? And how does he control it? To answer these questions, we have to look back at the origins and evolution of the boat. The gondola is first mentioned in ancient Venetian manuscripts in 1094, and the word is a corruption of cimbula, which derives from the ancient Greek and Latin for a small boat. In Venice, boats of the lagoon were all rowed standing up for simple reasons. To navigate the shallow channels out in the lagoon, you had to be elevated to be able to look where you were going. Secondly, in the city, there were literally thousands of small boats, and you could not possibly row amongst the traffic facing backwards. Here is one of the very first pictures of gondolas by the Rialto in Carpacci's painting of 1496, The Miracle of the True Cross. Wealthy Venetians had gone about the city on horseback or sedan chair, as the calle or passages were not originally paved, and it was of course muddy and wet. What better than to adapt a simple boat to carry people and go by water? This became the first gondola. Here's a clearer drawing. You can see the hull is double-ended. It has a raked prow over which people could embark, and some had a simple cover or felze. In this 16th century painting by Battista Angelo, the ends are more pronounced, and the boats are beginning to be recognisable to us as a gondola. Note there are two rowers here, one at the front and one at the back. Two rowers were for more power and speed when out in the open water of the lagoon, and for prestige around the city. Here's a drawing. It's evident the hull is longer to give space for the two rowers, and the ends raised with the metal ironwork to protect the boat against collisions. In this painting from the 17th century, the gondola has now evolved into the private vessel of the elite. Patrician families competed to decorate and gild their gondolas, much as they would to distinguish their horse-drawn carriages on terra firma. To combat this display of excess, the state passed a number of sumptuary laws during this period, restricting decoration and mandating that the colour of the boat's hull from then on had to be black. In this drawing of the boat, you can see the ferro at the stem and stern developing further, with the small teeth starting, that were heads of forged spikes or nails which actually secured the ferro to the stem. Canaletto was rigorously faithful to detail, even though he would occasionally move buildings to improve the view. He was a vedutisti after all. And this included the various boats represented in his paintings. He was a very accurate draftsman. The 18th century gondola is even longer, with the hull flat in the water from stem to stern. Here is a detail of another of his paintings. Note the gold gondolas, like this one here, which are those belonging to the ambassadors of the state from the various other countries. They were the only ones to which the sumptuary laws did not apply. Returning to this drawing of the 18th century gondola, it shows the ferro has reached its full height at the bow, and that would be level with my shoulder if I was standing next to it. With the cabin, but what was the purpose of the felze, and why was it so tall? So with the cabin or felze on the gondolier on the stern can't see the front of the boat. So the ferro shows him where the stem is and helps him steer. But it also acts as a gauge for the height of the bridges to clear the felze or cabin. So why is the gondola so long and narrow? Well, it has to be narrow to pass through the back canals of the city, but it also had to go out on the open water of the lagoon too. To make a narrow vessel more stable, you increase the length to give it greater mass. The extra length and weight also improves what's called its polar inertia, or period of oscillation, making its pitching and rolling on the waves slower and more comfortable for the occupants of the boat. This photo from the 19th century shows the cabin or felze is now enclosed with a door with glass windows and shutters with Venetian blinds to give even better privacy to the occupants. And here's a drawing of the same boat from the period. But there was a problem in the early 19th century. The Republic had fallen in 1797 when Napoleon liberated the city from its oligarchy and then promptly handed it over to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Venice's economy was in ruins, trade with the East had gone, and the patrician class decimated, dissipated, or had long since died out. But a new industry was about to save Venice: tourism. The wealthy and eccentric travelled to Venice for its art, its architecture, all the laxities of life in the bel paese. And the gondola was the perfect vehicle to view the city, except for that little black cabin. So the felze was soon replaced by a tendolino or summer awning, which allowed you to view the sights while having some protection from the Mediterranean sun. But often this would be dispensed with as an unnecessary encumbrance. Despite the nascent trade for tourism, the gondoliers were grumbling. That's nothing new. Having to row on their own, boats were big and heavy to manoeuvre. In the late 19th century, Domenico Tramontine made two inspired and significant alterations to the shape of the gondola. And this is his yard here. First, he offset the hull to make it asymmetrical or curved. Then he raised each end, reducing the waterline length. Why, I hear you ask? Good question. Well, the bias in the hull makes the gondola naturally veer to the right, thus helping the gondolier. This is particularly useful in narrow canals when the use of the oar is restricted. And the reduced waterline length makes the gondola easier to turn with only one oarsman. Note the short, immersed part of the hull compared to the overall length of the boat in this picture. But Domenico Tramontine gave himself and the other gondola builders a headache. How do you build an asymmetric boat with no centerline, no keel, and no plants? These are modern drawings, reconstructed from the designs of the gondola, but the old boat build was worked by eye. This is Nedis Tramontine, grandson of Domenico, in his square oil boatyard in Venice, in which I worked with him for 3 months. To begin the construction, 3 master frames made of oak and elm were set up on a building stock. Then the top plank, or sercho as it's called, is attached. And these planks are cut from a single 40-foot by 3-foot long board of oak, only 15 millimetres thick. And they're cut in a pair, and one goes on either side of the boat. Here you can see both planks attached to the 3 main frames and the 2 stems, one at either end, on the building stock, which is called the cantiere. The cantiere also gives shape or rocker to the bottom of the boat and has been adjusted in stages over the last 150 years to accentuate this feature. This is this part here at the back of the boat, which has been raised slowly. Next, the intermediate frames, or ordinate, are inserted into the hull. Notice how the frames are offset on the building stock to give more shape to the left side of the hull. Then the corbula, or gunwale, and sottocorbolo, or breast, made of oak, are fitted to the top edge of the hull. Now here Roberto is knocking them in. These are these 2 pieces. This one fits on top of the end of the ribs, and this one is cut round each rib and knocked into place. Then 4 cross members or trasti made of cherry are put in to stiffen the structure, and the decks are added at either end of the boat. The hull is then inverted and the sides wetted. Here they're using burning marsh roots to give the moisture to heat and literally steam the oak on the side of the hull. And the boat is then bent further to accentuate the shape as determined by the owner, the gondolier, depending on his personal requirements. The bottom is filled in, flanked with wide boards of pine, before the boat is turned the right way up for completion. Here you see the completed hull with all its past. The foredeck at the front, the main trasto or crossbeam in the middle against which the passengers sit, and the aft deck on which the gondolier stands. And this picture illustrates the variety of different principal timbers used in the construction: oak and elm for the frames in the brown in the bottom of the boat, lime for the blocks at each end of the boat in that pale green colour, oak for the side planks and the gunwales and breast, pine for the bottom in the creamy colour, cherry for the cross beams in that orangey red, and mahogany for the rusty colour, and larch for the decks. The interesting thing about the design is that without a keel to provide longitudinal stiffness, the structural strength of the boat is not in the bottom as you normally find, but in the box-type structure here, formed at the side, each side of the boat, between the gunwale and the breast and the frames. After painting the hull, the metalwork is added, including the stem fitting or ferro. And this is an interesting illustration of the evolution of the ferro at the bow of the boat from the 15th century to today. Finally, the gondola's equipment is added: a set of painted floorboards, cushions in plain cloth or brocade fabric, the armrests with a brass hippocampus or sea sirens or tritons. A deluxe gondola will have intricately carved fore and aft decks and side panels inside. And all in all, it takes two men about 30 days to build a gondola, and still costs around £30,000 if you want them. But the most important part of the equipment is the forecollar, made from the butt of walnut tree. This is perhaps the only bit of my gondola I could bring in to show you what it actually is in true scale here. It's carved by the Romaire, who also makes the oars, and is used by the gondolier to control and manoeuvre the boat. It fits into the side of the boat on the right-hand side, and the oar is principally used in the socket here or the morso.
So, Nick, is that a replaceable item?
It is.
It must wear out, yes.
It doesn't wear out actually very quickly. Occasionally you might break a bit of it, but they can generally be repaired. They do last a long time. That one's probably 50 years old. It's more often actually the oars wear more quickly than the forecollar, and they'll use a bit of grease in the joint. Yeah, where the chimney. So rowing a 36-foot long gondola weighing 750 kilograms requires a complex technique, but it is efficient, and studies have shown that the energy required is equivalent to that expended when walking. The gondolier's stance is with his right foot in front of his left. Now I shall demonstrate. Sorry, actually his left foot is in front of his right. And takes a shoulder width grip on the oar, and then he moves forward, keeping his back straight over his knees, pushing the oar and bending his knees as he goes. To start the boat, he first puts the oar at the bottom of the forecollar in the picture on the top left. And as the boat starts moving, he moves the oar up to the socket, as in here on the bottom left, for a normal rowing. But as I said, there are various places he can use the oar to manoeuvre the boat. If he wants to stop the boat, he drops the oar on the front of the forecollar, holds the loom, and that stops slows the boat down and stops it. Or he can lay the oar in the elbow shape of the forecollar when he's sculling up narrow canals. There are two parts of the normal rowing stroke of the gondola. The first part is called the prémie, where the gondolier immerses the end of the oar, twisting the blade perpendicular to its movement and pushing against the loom, pushing the boat forward. This also pushes the boat off to the left, though. In the stay stroke or return stroke, he feathers the blade, drops the loom, lifting the blade so there's only the tip remains in the water, and then draws the loom back towards his midriff, feathering the blade as he goes, putting downward pressure on the forecollar and forcing the boat back to the right. The amount of pressure he puts on the blade and the amount he feathers it as he does that return stroke controls how much he brings the boat back onto line. And it's a very subtle and delicate skill to learn. And the gondola advances, oscillating with each stroke of the gondolier about an offset drift angle, connecting the centre of drag of the hull with the centre of effort of the forecolor on the back of the boat here. So it doesn't travel in a straight line. This also creates a slight side-to-side rocking of the gondola, and is the cause of the unique and delightful motion of the boat. So what about the gondolier? In terms of numbers, there are currently 425 gondolas and gondoliers in Venice, plus a number of substitutes who don't have their own boat, but row for gondoliers in semi-retirement, or who've got better things to do. Gondolas and gondoliers were once split into three categories. First, the gondola da parada, or ferries, like those today crossing the Grand Canal. You may have taken one. These ferry gondolas are built wider than the normal boats and can carry up to 12 people. You'll notice that they row with two gondoliers because of the constant manoeuvring and the heavy weight of the boat. It's probably the best value gondola ride at about €2, I think. Then there's the most common, the gondola da Nolo, or those for hire at one of the 10 stations remaining on the Grand Canal and in front of St Mark's. Current tariff is €90 for 30 minutes. If you'll be lucky to get it for that there, they'll probably try and charge you extra for something. And they carry a maximum of 5 people. And then there's the gondola da casata, or private gondola, rowed by permanent gondoliers in livery. They were the elite of the fraternity, and unfortunately, they are no more. One of the last ones in Venice was owned by Peggy Guggenheim, seen here, who died in 1979. And her gondola is now in the museum in Venice, if you want to go and see it. The private gondolier was held in high esteem. Here's a quote from Carlo Goldoni in his play La Puta Onorata from 1749. Do you think our trade isn't an honourable and respectable one? We serve, it's true, but it's a noble service, and we don't get our hands dirty. We're the confidential secretaries of our masters, and there's no danger that anyone will learn anything about them from us. We're paid better than other people. We keep our houses decently. The shopkeepers give us credit. We're the model of loyalty. We're famous for our jokes and quick-wittedness, and above all, we are loyal to the death to our country, Venice, who's queen of the sea. Venetians have a love-hate relationship with the gondola. Apart from crossing the Grand Canal in Traghetto, the typical Venetian will never be seen in one, except perhaps for their wedding or for their funeral. But even that last trip to the cemetery island of San Michele has now been taken over by a motorboat. However, the Venetians are fiercely proud of their unusual method of rowing. Venice turns out in September for the Regatta Storica, where gondoliers compete with each other and other Venetian rowers for the prestigious race in a gondolino, or diminutive racing gondola for two rowers. But the biggest display of Venetian rowing is at Volgalonga every year in May. This is a 30-kilometre course that starts in St Mark's Basin and travels around the lagoon to Verano and back, finishing up the Grand Canal. Over 1,000 boats regularly attend and 5,000 rowers participate. It's open to any man-powered craft, but the vast majority are all the variety of traditional Venetian rowing boats. The regatta was originally started as a demonstration against moto ondoso, or waves produced by the motor traffic. But sadly, little seems to have been done to limit the speed of traffic or reduce their weight. To consider the future of the gondola, we have to ask, what is the purpose of the gondola now? What is its significance today? Is it a cultural icon, a historical artifact and symbol of the Serenissima, its art and history? From that point of view, we must preserve it as it is, its design, method of construction and decoration, in order to conserve it for the future. Or is it merely a simulacrum, an image or likeness of what it once was, but without the substance or meaning of the original? But how did the gondola become merely a commercial vehicle for the hordes of tourists? We've seen that by the beginning of the 19th century, the gondola was no longer the waterborne carriage of the elite. but it was the principal form of transport, and there were still around 2,000 of them in the city. When you arrived at the station, you could hail a gondola to take you and your luggage directly to your hotel or around the city, over to Lido, or even out into the lagoon to one of the islands, although you'd likely have to pay for another gondolier. But the gondola's preeminence would be threatened in 1881 by the arrival of Queen Margherita. This was not the Queen of Italy, but the name given to the first vaporetto, or steamer, on the lagoon. The gondoliers, of course, were furious and went on strike. While the steamers stirred up as much ink in the local press as water in the Grand Canal, the locals and tourists found the new service convenient and indispensable, and the gondoliers were obliged to return to work. In the early 20th century, another appearance threatened the existence of the gondola and was an omen of times to come. An enterprising hotel proprietor started a service of motor launches to take guests out to the islands. And it was only natural that they would also be used to carry them to the station. The gondoliers exploded again in protest, but the number of boats rapidly increased, and it was only solved when the gondoliers themselves were allowed to operate their own service of motor launches and water taxis. The licenses are lucrative and jealously guarded, and that's why a 10-minute trip from the railway station to St Mark's Square will cost you over €100, and there is no economic taxi service in the city. Of course, it was the internal combustion engine that was the significant development. All of its intangibles are now transported by hundreds of motor barges. And the locals' most favoured runabout is the coffinol, or speedboat, with a variety of different huge outboard motors on the back. And the Polizia or Carabinieri have their own boats in which to catch those going too fast. Still, almost everyone, like on the roads, ignores the speed limit. And all this motor traffic produces a mass of confused waves, causing a huge problem for the gondola. The rough water makes it impractical and uncomfortable for the gondolas to go anywhere outside the confines of the back canals and the Grand Canal in the city. Some commercial rowers have changed to using a sandalo. At only 7 or 8 metres long, rather than 11, it's much more manoeuvrable than a gondola and more economic to buy and maintain. Others are adapting their gondolas, for example, cutting the top of the stern off to allow the gondolas to pass under low bridges, making the decks for the gondolier to stand on broader and more comfortable, lifting the ends of the boat further out of the water to make them even easier to turn, and making the seahorses out of plastic rather than heavy, expensive cast polished brass. One boat builder is building the hulls in plywood, as quality timber is so hard to find. The plywood gondolas are stronger and longer lasting, but with a subtly different shape. The craftsmen who build and furnish the boats, who embody the gondola's intangible cultural heritage, want to protect the traditional skills and techniques of their trade. However, were modern materials, glues and machines available to the old artisans, they would have undoubtedly used them. This is a new design projected by Philip Stark in collaboration with the University of Venice. Built of laminated compressed bamboo, it's lighter, uses a small gyroscope to maintain stability, and has a solar-powered electric turbine to assist the gondolier. It's a controversial project, spurred by the need for the gondola to evolve. Does it inherit or debase the heritage of the gondola as we know it? The future of the gondola remains somewhat uncertain, obfuscated by the mist of the lagoon, but its destiny is irredeemably entwined with that of the iconic city in which it was first born over 1,000 years ago. Looking back, we've seen how the gondolas developed over the centuries to serve the needs of the city and the people. Should it be consigned to a museum or allowed to continue to develop? As long as Venice survives, the ravages of tourism, depopulation and climate change, we can be confident there will always be a gondola on which to witness its enduring charms. Thank you.
They're school for gondoliers. Did they all, how did they learn? Did they all fancy stuff?
To learn the trade, you can't start by becoming an assistant to a gondolier. You start rowing around the back canals to develop your skills. I mean, you start by learning Venetian rowing full stop before graduation to the gondola. And then there's a test you have to take to go on a certain route around Venice. There's a rowing test at which you can't touch any. I mean, if you've been to Venice and watched the gondolas, you'll never see them touch anything. They're quite extraordinary, their skills. And then they also have to take an exam on local culture and history and a language exam. So there is, I believe there is a school of sorts, yeah, but there's certainly a lot of hoops to jump through. Yeah.
It was interesting, the picture of the 19th century, the guy is wearing a trilby hat.
Yeah.
So where did this sort of, one always thinks of the gondolier with the straw hat and the ribbon and all the rest of it, the striped top. When did this emerge?
I believe it emerged in sort of the latter part of the Victorian period. These gondoliers before that wore all sorts of things, and it's changed over the time. The private gondoliers wore livery, and the striped shirts comes from just this sort of general seaman's heritage. And the straw hat's been going for the same time. A lot of fishermen wore straw hats. And there was the old joke. I remember when I was with a colleague and somebody asked us, "So what do the stripes mean?" And we said, "Oh yeah, that's how many years the gondola lived." You'll see, you've got to look out for the ones with just a couple of stripes. Of course, that's not the case. But yeah, back in the day, they wore all sorts of stuff. It wasn't quite so regimented.
Yeah. Two questions actually. Are there any female gondoliers?
There are now, yeah. There was certainly there was one who started working, because when you start as a gondolier, you have to join one of the gondola hire stations. They're called Marie Corelli, and date right back to sort of the 800s or 900s. They're ancient institutions like religious guilds. And you work there, and part of the job is rowing the traghetto at that gondola hire station, if they have one. I mean, there are fewer and fewer now. To earn your spurs as you gain experience before, then you row a hire gondola. So she was working, although last I heard she might have retired, but I'm not quite sure if there any others came in. But yeah, the mould was broken probably about 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah.
The other thing about it has connection with water. It's quite limited. Does it actually turn over at all? And if there are waves and things, do they stay to the back canals because there aren't so many waves there, so they actually maintain their stability?
Yeah, so lifting the ends out of water makes the boat less stable. That's true. And what you tend to find out, when I was talking about the boat being built and the bend being put in the boat for each gondolier, that depends on two things. One, on the weight of the gondolier. If he's heavier, he might ask it to prevent him more, and also where they're working. So if it's one of the gondolas which is high on the Molo, which is in front of St Mark's, where there's the open water of the Bacino, the water is very rough there, and so they tend to use flatter gondolas with more stability. If you're working up the Grand Canal, then they'll tend to have a bit more curvature in them to make them easier to turn. So yeah, it does. Gondolas have turned over before. Occasions they are generally quite stable, but it's not impossible if you do something stupid and people stand up and start moving about.
Thank you.
Where did Marie Corelli's gondola end up?
It's at the boathouse. Look at it. Yes, we keep it now. Yes, and look after it. Well, it's actually in our store at the moment, but it will be back at the boathouse soon. Yes.
Do you use it?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, she goes out for hire. Yeah.
And is it?
Yes, yes. She comes out for high days and holidays. Considering she's an old girl, yeah, we're going to keep on with her.
Yeah. I didn't see any life vests or do they have a safety officer?
Do they have a
Health and safety officer.
Probably not. It's an interesting thing. You'll find the gondola is exempt from almost any regulation. There's something called the recreational park directive. Sorry, before we left the evening, built a boat, we had to conform to these regulations. These regulations apply to every boat except for gondolas because they're unique. And because they have such a strong, very strong, almost closed shop. They do sort of tend to. That's in some respects they're the authors of their own downfall, because they're very controlling in what happens to the boat, and the licenses are restricted.
I wonder, is there anyone who regulates what they charge? Because every time I've been on a gondola, we've had this discussion about what you're going to charge.
Yeah. So the city, the commune, they regulate the fees. So there is a standard tariff, which you can look up on the city website. It's supposed to be exhibited at the higher point, which there might be somebody might have put a potted plant in front of it.
Yes.
But they will try and they will use every enterprise they can to charge you extra. As they let's go this way. Oh yeah, and then they'll charge you extra for it, or so that they're very good at trying to increase their fee. So that's one of the issues, sort of trying to fleece the tourist.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is in theory controlled, and even that was only made mandatory not that long ago. There always has been a tariff, always. You can look up the tariffs for the 1600s for going out in a gondola, but they're just completely ignored.
Do you work in any weather? I'm not being funny, just heavy rain sort of.
Italians? Excuse me. No, I don't. They generally work. I mean, if you try, if it's raining, you try to get a gondola, you might. There'll be very begrudging, out.
I know it sounds a bit controversial, but do they ever get in fights with one another? Upset?
Sure they do.
Yeah,
I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, there's rival families in there taking their.
Yeah, I'm sure one has the disagreements in every trade. So yes, I'm sure it happens.
Interesting.
Have you passed on your piloting skills to some of the lads at the boatyards?
You know what?
I
haven't yet. I haven't yet, and it's something I need to do. It takes a long time to learn. You've got to row for every day for a month to get sort of even half competent. For a couple of hours a day, it is quite.
So you've got along with every hire at the moment, then
Yeah, I do. It's a joy.
Yeah, sure.
The great thing about having the gondola is it puts a smile on people's faces when they get into it, and people on the bank seeing it. It's such joy to everyone. So it's a real pleasure to take out, except in the rain.
Yeah. Two people on yours.
I can take 3 on mine, or a couple of adults and a couple of children. So I said the bigger ones are supposed to take 5, although you will occasionally see 6 and 7 in them. So I'll try and squeeze them in.
Is the clothes shop mainly sort of father to son and that sort of thing, or it kept within the family?
Yeah, it was for a long time. That's right. So if you had to have a license for the gondola, and if you owned that license, you could pass it on or sell it. And that caused a huge amount of restriction, because to start with, what happened was the gondola would retire and then get a substitute to row it for him. So the substitute would get half the fares, and the gondolier would get the rest. And then he would sell it. And I've heard of a gondola license years ago changing for a 6-figure sum. It was quite extraordinary, because they were so lucrative if you were working at one of the good ice stations. But now I believe the city has taken control of it, and they are returned once the gondola retires, and the city issues them depending on, there is some, if you're the son of a gondolier, you get some credit for that. and get more chance of getting one, but it's done on a much more equitable basis now, which is good. Because yeah, it was a very restricted close shop, which is one of the issues about the water taxes. And as I said, each gondola hire station, there's also water taxes. We don't appreciate that. So they're running both of them. And this is one of the issues about why can't you walk out the station and get a simple, ordinary boat to take you to your hotel, which doesn't cost 110 euros to step into it. You know, it's the only city in the world you can't, and that's the restrictive practices which in the city, in the lagoon, which are partially have for a long time been controlled by the interested parties, the gondoliers and themselves.
Is yours the only one in England?
No, it's not. It's not. There's a couple of others. There's one which was owned. It was a couple owned by colleagues of mine. It did reside at Oxford. Now he's just sold it to, funnily enough, a company who's used it for film work. But I belong to a club called City Barge Boat in Oxford, and we've got about 20 different Venetian boats between us. So the club owns half a dozen. So we've got some of the Sandalos, the more ordinary Venetian boats, which is the one you take out for a jolly for a row because it's small and light and easy to manage. We've got a varnished gondola, same size, but it's not black, it's varnished. That's meant for going out in processions, for taking people for a jolly. We've got other boats, a Cubrino, a Gondolino, diminutive gondola, all sorts of different boats. And so we do a lot of Venetian rowing down on the Thames and take the boats to various places. So there are quite a number of Venetian boats and a good skills base for Venetian rowing in the UK. And a lot of my colleagues go to Venice regularly to row in the regattas there, particularly that long marathon around the lagoons, which is an absolute treat.
People might use it for a wedding again.
Yeah, absolutely. Weddings are great for proposals, lots of proposals. Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any other cities in the world that have taken up the gondola idea? There must be other shallow.
There are actually.
Harbours.
Yeah, there are, and it's a good point that it's actually the situation which determines how you row the boat.
Yeah.
So in the Far East and in some parts of India, they row in the same way. They stand on the back of a flat, shallow boat because it's shallow, because you need to stand on the back to see where you're going, using one oar because it's much simpler. You can row efficiently with one oar. You can Venetian row with two as well, actually. Not on a gondola because it's not rigged for that, but say in the Sandalo, that smaller boat, you stand in the bottom of the boat and you have two oars on the other side, which you hold with one hand and you row with both at the same time. It's called Balavalazana, which means knitting. So yeah, there are other places, yeah.
I was just interested when you said it was about 90 euros, which seems incredible to me because when I went 10 years ago, it was 90 euros then. So it must be some of the best bargains in the world. It was also just fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was worth every euro.
Good. Terrific.
But that is true, it's still 90 euros.
Well, I looked it up sort of this week, and that's what it said on the town's website. When you actually went to the hire station, when you found one for 90 euros, might be a different story.
Yes. You know, in London, if you've got a taxi, you have to do what they call the knowledge. Do they have a sort of test there?
Well, they do, in that they have to be, they have to know the history of the city, so they have to be able to act as a tour guide, effectively, on the back of the boat. So tell people about the buildings, the history of the city, famous people who live there, all that sort of stuff, and in 3 or 4 languages. So they do have to have a certain amount of skill and knowledge. But the difficult thing, the sort of between the gondoliers and the gondolas and the Venetians, which I intimated earlier, is that the Venetians have nothing to do with them. It's a completely different part of Venice. Venetian would never use a gondola. They want to, and they sort of slightly disparaging about them. But if you get a Venetian outside Venice and he comes across like our gondola, oh my God, they're all over it. Because it's the icon of their city. So they're extremely proud of them. You get them out of there because they're so like, so they have this sort of love-hate relationship with them because they're of no practical use to a Venetian. Well, when they get married. that's all it goes. Okay.
So